It's time. We are back for the Chris Macpherson Show 003, and we're going to pull apart your sporting landscape across the sporting realm. We've got the Commonwealth Games, we've got the A-League, we've got the Matildas, we've got, of course, the F1, and we'll have a little dabble into the WBBL. And as we kick it off with the Matildas, I am, of course, joined by Roundball Australia's Lachie Avil. Lachie, welcome back for a third time lucky.
G'day, Chris. 3 in a row. Yeah, good to be here.
You're getting a bit of a run. People start talking about what we're up to. At the moment, it's absolute dribble and just chat about sport, and we love it.
Speak for yourself.
Well, you don't love it?
Oh, I love it, just not the dribble.
Well, yours is in form, mate. I'm just here to piece it all together and be the glue between the information. So, speaking of the glue between the information and things that we do love, the Matildas have found some winning form. They've had a couple of friendlies across the last few days, and we've taken on Switzerland. There was some concerns that the draw wasn't great, but all of a sudden things are looking very rosy. Are we getting too much into it after a win over world number 4 Germany?
Yes, absolutely. But that's what we're here for, right? Is to overreact to good wins. For our national teams, we always love to do that. It was a good win, 2-1 against Germany. It's a team we haven't beaten in a very, very long time, ranked 4th in the world or something. So, you get a win in any circumstances over a team that highly ranked. You've got to feel pretty good.
Yeah, you take the wins when you get them, as you say. Some takeaways, obviously some less familiar names on the score sheet. Well, probably not less familiar names, but less familiar in the scoring sense. So that's another positive to see some of them finding form and scoring on the international stage.
Yeah, of course. And what a goal. Kyra Cooney cross from just inside halfway, lobbing over the keeper. I think it was her 50th cap for the Tillies as well, and then her first goal, as you say. So, yeah, that was extraordinary to wake up to, finish from deep and deep. Very nice for her to get on the score sheet.
Well, it's certainly something to watch. As you said, I think we need to take it with a grain of salt, but overreact in the short term. Enjoy the win. It's a top 4 side. The Matildas sitting outside the top 10 at the moment. So we'll take it while we can get it. But, it's very much going to be focused onto the next for them. But undefeated from those 2 starts under caretaker coach.
Yeah, Tom Samani, he's come in and he's done exactly what Football Australia would have wanted him to do, which is just to steady the ship and be a calm presence while the search continues to be ongoing for a new head coach. It won't be Tom Samani. I know, he gets a win with the team and people are saying, oh, well, maybe we could give him another go around. But no, that's not his role this time. It's just to be that presence and make sure the wheels keep ticking along, which he's done quite well.
Well, we'll watch what's next for the Matildas. There's a lot of water to go under that bridge, as you say, to see where they end up with a new full-time manager once they're appointed, and lots of moving pieces there. But we'll take the glow, we'll take the positive for now, and we'll roll things along. We'll close out the soccer. We'll be back with Roundball a little bit later in the show. Well, moving on from the Matildas, we are on to something else that is of key importance to our national sporting landscape. It is the Commonwealth Games. We know the backstory here. Dan Andrews put his hand up for it. Victoria were successful in their bid. And then not all that long ago, they decided that it wasn't financially viable to hold the games in Victoria. Was going to be a boon to the regional areas, but no longer. And all of a sudden it goes to the other side of the globe in Glasgow. Lachie Avil, it's an interesting piece here. I understand the financial metrics around it, but it really takes it away. It was a huge opportunity for some of those regional centres, especially in Victoria, to be seeing international level sport, and we'll get into what it means for those other sports in a moment.
Yeah, and one of the funny things to come out of this is that a lot of the facility developments that were promised as part of this bid are still being upheld. So, that we're losing an awful lot of money to then get rid of the games and send them off to Glasgow, and then we're still spending on this money on facility development, which is, of course, in isolation is a great thing, but it's a lot of dollars down the drain to not even get the Com Games in Victoria.
It certainly is a lot of money down the drain, as you say, to not host something. Obviously, there's a recap and a recompense in terms of, as you said, those facilities and the benefit to community sport and regional sport, which is great. But it probably leads to that bigger question. At the end of the day, we know the Olympics, obviously a massive draw card. The Commonwealth Games have been in the past, but we're seeing now a whittled down version. We're seeing a lot of countries don't want to host the Commonwealth Games. Is it the end being nigh for the Commonwealth Games because there's no longer a financial justification and a financial return? The Olympics, at least, they are the premier multi-sport event in the world, and the landscape's just so cluttered, as we know, here in Australia more than anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, the Olympic Games is not immune from this trend as well. We're seeing it in mega events all around the world that the benefit of hosting is just diminishing as the world becomes a more global place. And specifically for the Commonwealth Games, this 2026 edition that, as you've said, a lot of sports being cut off the top just so Glasgow can host it in the first place. It's really lowering the reputation of the event even further. So, people are hoping that this is just a temporary fix until the next cycle, but time will tell, and it's not looking good.
As we said, such a congested sporting landscape, and for some of the sports that have been axed, and we'll roll through, and I know you'll have some certainly fairly vocal points on at least one of the sports that's very close to your heart. But it's now a position where we're sitting where the landscape's actually been cut in half, right? Like it's half of the sports or less. Like we're now seeing a games that a lot of people said there wasn't a lot of relevance already because a lot of the sports, they're just for the countries that can't quite win gold at the Olympics. Well, now we're going beat up on each other, Australia and the UK and all these things. And let's be honest, the Aussies did okay at the Olympics, so I'm not too sure that that's all that relevant. But they've reduced a lot of these team sports out. They've taken them out, and for some of the sports, like I know netball, for example, this is their second biggest sporting event on their calendar, cyclically alongside their World Cup. It's not like T20 cricket, and we know cricket's one of the others that's gone by the wayside, but T20 cricket, there seems to be, and I'm a cricket fan, but there seems to be some sort of World Cup or World Tournament every about 15 minutes. So some of these sports that are probably what we might call second-tier sports, and I mean that with absolutely no malintent, it's going to be a real impact for, and again, it's probably those sports that are Commonwealth-dominated sports that don't have other big opportunities to get together, such as the Olympics, etc.
Yeah, and look, that was my first impression when I was hearing of this news. But I want to take you to some quotes from Simon Orchard, who is a very famous Australian hockey player, who, that was the sport that you're referring to, which is what I'm heavily involved in. And he did an interview on ABC the other day, and he came out and said that he thought the Commonwealth Games was essentially this glorified sporting carnival. He called it a Mickey Mouse event. He actually didn't give a lot of weight to the Commonwealth Games, which I thought was really surprising because hockey is a sport that outside your World Cup and your Olympics, for the Commonwealth nations, it probably is the third event in that cycle that you're aiming for. And Australia is a very good hockey nation in global sense. In the Commonwealth sense, the women have won more than 50% of the gold medals at the Commonwealth Games where hockey has been involved, and the men have won every single one of them. They have not won silver or bronze or dropped off the podium at all in the Commonwealth Games they've competed at. So Australia has done very well in a hockey sense at the Com Games. But then you have these athletes saying, well, no, actually, we didn't take it too seriously. It's all about the Olympic Games anyway. And now, the extra addition for the 26 Commonwealth Games is that we actually have a Hockey World Cup starting 2 weeks after the Games finishes. So Simon was saying, well, we're not too sad to see the backside of it because we can just focus on our World Cup preparation. So I agree. Look, some of these lower sports, they will see the Com Games as one of these premium events that they want to work towards. But apparently for some of them, and hockey is inclusive of that, maybe it's not such a bad thing that they're getting rid of it after all.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's been a bit of that mixed opinion, and I certainly think that's probably easy for the stronger nations who get that opportunity. But for some of these smaller Commonwealth nations, it might be a little bit different. As you say, we've got a really good record, especially at the Commonwealth Games. We've got a strong record in hockey at the Olympics, right? But overall, the Commonwealth Games, that's certainly the case. And so you can think for events like the cricket, and we've seen that historically that the Aussies might have taken it as a little bit of a party tour if we go back to the men in '98. The girls weren't so bad last time around, but again, that's probably played a part. But it seems it's really interesting for me when you look at the selection of some of the events. The one that really puzzled me was 3-on-3 basketball.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously the decision in this aspect is a budgetary one, so perhaps it's one of the cheaper events to put on. You would imagine the stadiums would be quite small, the facilities wouldn't be too hard to put together in comparison to something like hockey.
Less accommodation than any other team sport too, right?
Yeah, exactly. 3 players on the field. I mean, you look at hockey, you need these purpose-based surfaces and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, look, in terms of global impact, you definitely have 3x3 basketball pretty low, but in a year when you're trying to get sports on and rating them by the dollar, that's the first category of preference, then maybe it isn't so much of a surprise.
Yeah, there's some interesting ones when you have a look at it. So just to go through a few of the sports that have been covered, we talked about hockey, cricket, badminton, wrestling, table tennis, diving, rugby sevens, beach volleyball, mountain biking, squash, and rhythmic gymnastics. I'm probably on the fence about half of them, and there's a few of them that I'd really like to see, but again, that's going to be very interesting. Shooting, it got dropped from Birmingham. It's still out. It's going to be very interesting to see. Essentially, the roster is going to look like this. It's going to be athletics and para-athletics, swimming and para-swimming there. I mean, they're kind of the bread and butter of these sorts of events, right? Artistic gymnastics will still be in there. Track cycling and para-track cycling. Netball is going to stay in, which is great to see. Weightlifting and para-powerlifting, boxing, judo, bowls and para-bowls, which is great for our 75-year-old athletes, and 3x3 basketball and 3x3 wheelchair basketball. So, I think there might be some logic in there. It'll be interesting to see how it all goes about, but it's going to be a very lean roster of sports, and I think that it's going to pay the toll because a couple of those areas where Australia, obviously we do really well in the swimming and we do okay in the athletics at this level, but those team sports that we do really well in and we're known for, the rugby sevens, the cricket and the hockey, they're all gone. So I think the eyes on screens and potentially even the rights, I'm not sure where that's up to, is going to pay. And if it doesn't pay in this cycle, if they continue with this lean down version, I think it's going to become less and less relevant. And to be fair, there was already people questioning the relevance. I'm a sports nuffy. I would have gone to the games, and I think we've talked about this inside the round ball circles with a couple of people and the inner sanctum previously. I would have gone to the games because they were here in Australia, and I'm a sports nuffy. But to the casual sports observer, if they didn't care about the Commonwealth Games before, they certainly aren't going to now.
No, and the Commonwealth Games, like most of these major sporting events, it's a 4-year cycle. So it's not like we just move on from this and you say, oh, we've got another game next week. No, this is like now an 8-year gap between the last proper Commonwealth Games to the next one. And that's a long time for a reputation for such a big event to be, diminished in the way it is being done in this cycle. So, yeah, look, I think it's probably fading already, and the way that this Glasgow Commonwealth Games look like it's coming together is probably not doing it any favours.
Look, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to close it out with an analogy that I heard from someone else, and I think it's like a boys' trip. When you're 18 and 20, the boys' trip's great. If you have a boys' trip every year or every 2 or every 4 years, and let's use the 4-year cycle of the Commonwealth Games, it gets a little bit less rowdy each time, so people start dropping off, and essentially we're now well into our 40s. It's no longer the flashbacks, the winebacks. We know we can't back up. These boys' trips are starting to dwindle down. They're not going to be as wild. They're not going to be as exciting to hear the stories out of. And soon enough, it's going to be dinner at 5 o'clock and bed at 7 o'clock on the boys' trip, and no one's going to be paying any attention to what is the Commonwealth Games. That's how I see it. But that's the Commonwealth Games. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments below if you think we're absolutely wrong and the Commonwealth Games is going to be a staple of your sporting diet moving forwards. But we'll take a break and join you with some more action across the sporting landscape momentarily. Well, rolling it right along from Commonwealth Games and all puns intended, it's time to dig into some more round ball action. And again, when it's round ball action, we head to Round Ball Australia and none other than Lachie Avil back on. It feels like a bit of deja vu today. We're spending a lot of time together, but time to look into the A-League Round 2 recap, mate. And the Corica Cup, as we called it last week, is being held by none other than Steve Corica.
Yes, good win for Auckland on the weekend. It was a really crazy finish. Two teams that, well, now I expect to be right up there towards the end of the competition. Sydney FC, absolutely, and Auckland, I think, have at very least proven after 2 rounds, as much as you can after just 2 games, but that they'll be up there as well. So, yeah, it was a very fascinating contest with plenty of controversy, plenty of spite as well in it, which is good to see for a club just in their second game of competition.
Yeah, it's. I heard people talking about it almost being another big blue with the amount of spice in it, another blue team into the mix of potential powerhouses too in this season, which is interesting. We could have quite a run of 3 of the blue sides at the top, and we'll get to one of those again in a moment. But in terms of, as you said, there was some controversy, which the sky blue side of this battle will certainly not let us escape without discussing.
No, and there was 3 really. Sydney FC had a penalty shout that was not given. It was probably one of those ones where the call isn't overturned by VAR, whichever way the referee goes. So a little bit of wrestling in the box. They can perhaps feel a little bit hard done by there. They had a goal ruled out for offside, which if you go back and look at it, I think was right. You can't really argue with that one. But then the goal for Pynak at a little back heel, fox in the box kind of finish. It looks like it hits his arm on the way down. I'm in the camp where I say I think that is handball. But again, probably unlucky in the fact that the camera angles weren't quite good enough to say that there was a clear and obvious error, which is the buzz phrase that the VAR has to adhere to. So, yeah, perhaps a little bit on the wrong end of the stick for Sydney FC, but, amazing win for Auckland and the scenes over there at Go Media Stadium, just that kind of victory for a club, especially in its infancy like Auckland are, is incredibly important, and it was so good to see the atmosphere there.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the interesting things, and again, you talk about the key catchphrases that go around with VAR and clear and obvious error, and then you get consistency. The hard thing with a clear and obvious error is when you don't have clear and obvious camera angles. And
yeah.
We've heard your colleague on Round Ball, Paletti, talk about XG and camera angles that are related to it, and they get quite a bee in their bonnet about it, around the fact that XG can't be authentic here, and it makes it hard to really execute on the VAR at the level they need to. But then that other side of that is also consistency, and it segues us nicely into one of the other games, and we might jump a little bit around the order here. But on Friday night, there was a penalty, and admittedly Ryan Scott did what Ryan Scott does and saved the penalty. But there was another penalty that a lot of fans of Sydney will probably argue, well, was it any clearer or more obvious of an error that was made in that situation than what was made here? And again, the beauty of sport is there's so many greys and nuances, and humans are involved and they make mistakes, and we're never going to be perfect. And if we were, then we'd have nothing to talk about and we'd be out of a gig here. But is there a solution here?
No, there's not. We can talk about it forever, but we're not going to find a happy solution. At the end of the day, we can get technology involved as much as we want, but there's still a human sitting behind it. So there is no perfect solution, at least in my eyes. We just got to, train up our referees to do the best they can. I thought they got the one in the Macarthur Jets game correct. I thought it was a clear and obvious trip, and the penalty was awarded. But good on Ryan Scott. He had a really good game, not just that penalty as well, and it was the hero at the end, and I think a really important win for the Jets as well.
Yeah, a big win for the Jets, and a big, a boost when you look at young Eli Adams. He absolutely was composed and calm with that first shot, and you could see that confidence. I don't think if he doesn't score the first one, I don't think he takes the second shot from outside the box, but absolutely laced it. Poor Philip Curto looked like he was playing stuck in the mud back in the schoolyard both times, and I don't want to blame him for it because there was some absolutely horrific defence that led up to both of them. But again, talking back to that man you mentioned before, the second goal came from the actions of Ryan Scott. Eyes up football, getting it down for Ben Gibson. Sorry, I had a mental blank there.
Yeah.
Who then did well, set Eli Adams free. Eli Adams had some other options, and I think had he not laced it, he might have been getting a what for from the coach because he had some other options out wide. I think Willisol and one other. But at the end of the day, he's got a double. He's up and running, and it's great to see. And Rob Stanton, if he can do what he talked about in the post-game press conference, and he sees Eli Adam following that Clayton Taylor trajectory, and we know Clayton's had a couple of bumps at the start of this year, he's going to be the young star guru. He's the young star whisperer, Rob Stanton, if he does that.
Yeah, I mean, Eli Adams' pedigree has been well known. When he was at Victory last year, Tony Popovich called him the best finisher at the club. And this was at a point in the season where Bruno Fornaroli was miles ahead of everyone in the league in terms of the Golden Boot race. So we've known that he could finish a goal off for a little while now, but obviously he never had that run of games with the opportunities available to him at Victory. I was quite sad to see him go, to be honest, as a Melbourne Victory fan, because it was clear that he had potential. But yeah, this is a great boost for him. And I think for the club as well, because, the Jets are a team that probably not many people predicted to do too much this year. And you're really close to being an 0-2 team and having a 0% winning record to start your season. But instead of really, really good come from behind victory away from home, that's the kind of stuff that really can get you going when you come into training the next few weeks. So massive for Eli Adams and massive for the Jets. Huge
going into the bye this week. Let's talk about another team that ties into the Jets. They played the Jets in round one and got away with a 1-0 win, and got away with is probably the term. And then Melbourne City, they didn't look terribly impressive on the weekend. Is it time for Melbourne City fans, and I know that might be classed as an oxymoron in some sections of the A-League, but is it time for that small cluster of very loyal subjects and supporters to be a little bit concerned, a lot concerned, or just wait and see it's way too early in the season to start panicking?
Well, I mean, if you're a Melbourne City fan, you're annoyed because it's a derby, and it doesn't matter where you are in terms of your evolution as a team or where the cross city team is as well. You lose a derby, you're upset. And for the first half hour on Saturday night, Melbourne City were pathetic. And, those words are straight out of the mouth of Aurelio Vidmar, in the post-match press conference. He was going off about his team's performance, and not just the football, but just the effort and the competitiveness that they showed in the first half hour weren't enough. So there's a fight and there's an effort factor to it. There's also a personnel issue to it and a tactical side to it. They're missing a couple of key players. Jimmy Jago at the base of midfield hurts. Nathaniel Atkinson was playing in midfield as a stopgap for Matt Lachie in a kind of advanced midfield role. So I imagine as soon as Leckie's fit, maybe Atkinson comes back to right back. They played Kai Truan at the heart of midfield. And the new guy, Jermaine Ferreira, at centre back, who got absolutely bullied the entire first half and got whipped off at half time. So I think a full strength Melbourne City, of course, you're waiting for Max Caputo to come in at striker as well, will look like a different team because I think they did show enough against the Jets to still leave me with some optimism. Obviously, we know it's a long season, but definitely concerning signs, but they really just have to back it up straight away against Western with a little bit of effort and fight. That's what fans should really want to see.
Yeah, we'll have a look ahead to that game in a moment. The other games this round, we obviously saw the best of the West, and I don't know if it was no one or both of them, or I don't know that there was that much to really take away from Juan Mata's visit to the outer suburbs of Melbourne. I'm sure he won't be leaving any great TripAdvisor reviews for Ironbark Fields.
Yeah, I mean, it honestly looked all right off camera. Like, Western United gets a lot of stick from the A-League community. And they're a few years and several years behind on their plans to build a stadium, but they're in the right direction. And finally, at least they're not playing at Amy Park in front of, 6,000-7,000 people. Yes, it was only maybe 4.5 out at Tarneit, but at least the stands were full and, it looked like there was actually a bit of a good vibe around the place. So I think that's always a positive. Wanderers kind of didn't show anything. Like, they scored a goal, and then, as we've kind of predicted, their defence was a little bit leaky. Jack Clisby, tried to clear a ball, ended up laying it up for Ibasuki in the penalty spot. So, not really a whole lot learnt from that one, I don't think.
Speaking of learnings, I would suggest Wellington beating Perth 2-0, even though it was in Perth. Probably not that outrageously unpredictable.
No, pretty on par for expectations here. Wellington, as much as they do sit second in the league, and it gives us a really good 1v2 next week, they haven't had a test yet, really. I know they drew 1-1 at home to Western, but with a few key players out, that's not their full strength 11 either. So, yeah, Perth's still bad, and Wellington's still capable of beating poor teams away.
Well, it's not too bad when you can fly that sort of distance and still get a win, so I'm sure they will, Chiefy will be happy with the points there. And finally, Central Coast, they were taking all comers at absolutely everything last year. This year, they're struggling to beat time with a stick. Are Central Coast on the slide? They certainly are if we look at the ladder at the moment and how it shapes up. They're sliding down the ladder, which is probably going to impact, they're probably one of the more fickle and fair weather fan bases, and I don't mean that with any insult, but Central Coast and Newcastle are two fan bases that, look, if their team's successful, they will absolutely fight tooth and nail to get a ticket to the ground, and we saw that when Newcastle got all the way to hosting a grand final. We saw it last year. But it's going to be very quickly that fans will be exiting stage left if they can't start winning in some form of competition.
And I think hopefully that'll come this week. So I'm going to flip the question back around on you. I'm going to say they've slid, but I think hopefully now they're back on the up again. And
so they've hit rock bottom. That's the caption here. Lachlan Avil says Central Coast Mariners have hit rock bottom.
Yes, I think the team they're coming up against this week, Perth Glory, has still got a few little trips downwards to go, and maybe their rock bottom will look a little bit different to the Mariners. But the Mariners are extremely well coached by Mark Jackson, and they've had some troubles at the start of this season. But I think a game at home against Perth Glory is just the tonic they need right now, just to get 3 points under the belt, which they should do fairly comfortably and get their season back on track. And, they still haven't lost a game in the A-League. And they've lost, 3 Asian Champions League elite games by 1 or 2 goals, not much more than that, definitely. And they've got a game coming up against one of the Shanghai teams who are competing for the Chinese Super League at the moment. They're right at the end of their season, so do they even have a full-strength team available? So maybe it's just a window, I don't know, for the Mariners to get a few wins on the board in the next 7 days and, perk up their season again.
Well, it's going to be a big week for the Mariners. We'll pick apart round 3 in a moment. We might take a breather, rehydrate, and come back and dig into round 3. Heading on from round 2 of the A-League, let's get moving into round 3, and it is a huge week ahead for the A-League men's competition. And the headline act is the New Zealand Derby. The scene is set. It is 1v2. And Wellington decided to get in early. Shots were fired ahead of Auckland's clash with Sydney FC.
Yeah, and about time, Chris, because whilst, the Wellington Phoenix are getting in before the game here, Auckland have been at it for a while, ever since the club's inception, as we've seen on the screen there, a little bit of fan content. This has been building up for a long time. We saw, before it was even officially announced, the kit, we saw someone have a little walkabout onto a Wellington Phoenix game in an Auckland FC kit. Whether that was sanctioned officially by the club, we'll never know, by the letter of the law. But, this has been building for a long time, and for it to finally come around is very, very exciting.
It's great that we're only getting to round 3 and we've got it. It's great that it's at the top of the table. Both the teams are in pretty good form. Auckland in really good form. Wellington, as you said before, probably not really tested. This was always going to be a test for both these sides, but even more so, it's the real measuring stick now for both these sides. The winner should sit atop the table should someone take all 3 points, which is a great place to be, even though it's very early in the season.
Yeah, so according to my cursory look of the official A-League regulations, I believe it's the 8th tiebreaker that separates Wellington Phoenix from Melbourne Victory at the moment by a red card, which gives us this lovely 1v2 lead up. Victory MacArthur is also 3v4, by the way, but we'll get to them. Top of the table clash. Auckland have looked really, really good. They're the only team in the competition, obviously, with a perfect record. Beating Sydney FC is a massive scalp. And Wellington Phoenix, we're not sure. Marco Rojas, Paulo Retre are going to be 2 of their core players. They've both missed the start of the season. Not sure if they're going to be back for this game or not. And even if they are, it's going to be their first game back in a little while. So I think Auckland come into this one with the edge, which is crazy considering how good of a season that Wellington had last time out.
It certainly is. I think Auckland head in with their nose in front, but I know for sure one thing, 3 o'clock on Saturday, I will be parked firmly in front of the TV screen because I want to watch this one. There was no love lost as we talked about Auckland v Sydney last week. I think it'll be even less so. There's going to be a bumper crowd in at Sky Stadium, aka the Cake Tin, and they've been getting great fans in terms of turnout over the last 12 and a bit months with their success. This is going to be one of the hottest tickets. I was going to say in town, but this is the hottest ticket in the country.
Well, in the country, yeah, absolutely. And, we were having a little joke the other day, Ramble Australia. We should be calling ourselves Ramble New Zealand because they're, beating the rest of us at the moment. And I know that the league's getting it behind it with some of their advertising as well, really leaning into the New Zealand angle, which is pretty funny. But yeah, the crowd should be amazing. And I think it's really good, looking back on it, that we've been able to go round 1 Sydney Derby, round 2 Melbourne Derby, into now the Kiwi Classico. And some people don't like when you have marquee fixtures plugged at the start of the season, but the fact is that the fixture is a marketing tool as well, and it's really built a lot of hype. And this is the third hat trick ball, if you will. It's going to be really, really awesome. I can't wait.
Well, that's it. I think the leagues deliberately kind of try to drip feed these games to us. Obviously, we're only a couple of weeks away from Unite Round, which will be a big piece in itself, and we know that there's some real big matchups there. Next week, we'll see Sydney and Macarthur, and if they both get wins in their games, which we'll get to in a moment, that'll be a Sydney derby of sorts. I know they don't like us taking that away from Sydney and Western Sydney Wanderers, but they've done well with that scheduling. I think if we can drip feed, a sort of prime time premier game each week, then that's great. Speaking of primetime premier rivalries, in every other sport in Australia, Sydney versus Brisbane is a huge rivalry. We'll talk about this off air. Bizarrely in the A-League, it kind of never really has been, despite there would have been times in the Postecoglou era where Sydney would have been strong and Brisbane was strong. They probably haven't played in a big grand final or anything to really add that spice to it that we can, going back through the time. So maybe that's the reason. A lot of the times it was, Brisbane coming up against Central Coast or Sydney coming up against Melbourne in the early years. So does this ever become a rivalry? And certainly it's a crucial game right now. Brisbane's had a very slow start. Sydney coming off that loss, they'll have a point to prove.
Yeah, and look, when you asked me that question, I was thinking back, and maybe it was that kind of Postecoglou era when both of these teams were actually quite competitive. That's how these kind of natural rivalries grow as well. And I think maybe just because football is so separate from mainstream sport and culture in Australia, it's never really had that state of origin feel about it. But who knows? Maybe that's something that is being leaned into a little bit. I know part of the kit design for Brisbane Roar was having this maroon and leaning into that Queenslander identity a little bit. So, maybe in the return game, we'll have sky blue against maroon because it's on the away kit. But it's going to be interesting to see because Brisbane, they're coming off the bye, so they've had the one loss away to Auckland, which it doesn't seem like there's any shame in. And then Sydney FC coming off, Douglas Costa missing their recent game with hamstring tightness and Joe Lawley exiting, we think, with a groin in the 35th minute as well. So as good as they've been, they are two very important players to their side. And if they're not fit for this game, then that really opens up the door for Brisbane playing in their first home game of the year.
Well, it certainly does. And, when you have a look at how it all shapes up, you talked about them embracing that Queenslander mentality. So I'm assuming that's going to mean they're going to have a chip on their shoulder. And no one better to have a chip on their shoulder than Ruben Zadkovic, who played his whole career like he had a chip on his shoulder.
Yeah, look, I think people are sleeping on Brisbane. I really do. And I've been laughed at a little bit for predicting them to make a finals appearance this year. It was a little bit of a punt because there's competition behind these predictions, as we know. But Ruben Zadkovic got them a few wins towards the back end of last season, and they have some exciting, youth Queenslanders. Tommy Waddingham is the very obvious example. He'll play at striker for them. He's a young, tall guy who can nick away the goals when he wants to. They've got one of the best midfield pairings in the league, I think, with Keegan Yelisic, a very young, exciting player, and Jay O'Shea, who is the best progressive passer in the league. He's exceptional. So they've brought in a few little wildcard visa players, a little bit of A-League experience as well. They're a bit of a mixed bag. So they could be very good, they could be very bad, and it'll be interesting to see.
You sound like you're getting splinters in your backside. They could be very good, they could be very bad, or they could be somewhere in between. They could be a football team. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe.
Speaking of could-be football teams, the Central Coast Mariners, they take on Perth. You touched on it before. I don't think there's too much to pull apart here, but it will be interesting to see how Central Coast approach this. Obviously, looking at this on Saturday evening in Gosford, it's a home game for them into a home game midweek, Tuesday night, if I'm not mistaken. So it's quite a short turnaround for the Asian Champions League elite as well. So there's a lot to play at here, but they also would be very cognizant of that point we were talking about before. They need to start getting some points, and if they lose to Perth at home, then that might be panic stations.
Well, if it makes you feel more comfortable, Chris, I won't sit on the fence for this one. Central Coast will win this game. Perth Glory, hapless, really. You can't expect to win games of football defending the way they do, just on an individual level, not putting in enough effort, and they don't look coordinated together as a team at all. So despite all of Central Coast's difficulties in the last month or so, I think they'll still have well enough ability to get a win here.
This might be the spark. Speaking of predictions that you like to make, mate, you said on this show last week it would be the most MacArthur thing to do to go from winning 6-1 to losing to the Jets at home. They did that. Their chance at redemption is Melbourne victory in Melbourne on Sunday.
Yeah, and it's a fixture that they won just a couple of weeks ago in the Australia Cup final, and they get to add Villers-Germain into the lineup that beat Victory a couple of weeks ago as well. So if you're looking at that trend line, you'd say MacArthur will be looking pretty good. But Victory looked very dangerous on Saturday night in the derby. I think if you replay that Australia Cup final, 9 out of 10 times Victory get the job done. It just didn't happen to be it happened to be the 1 out of 10 that MacArthur got to lift the trophy. But no, MacArthur are a good team. I will say I do have them playing finals football still, but at home at Amy Park, I have Victory with an edge there.
Some revenge for the Australia Cup. This next one, the Red and Blacks versus the Reds. I couldn't come up with much more. I don't know that we've seen enough of Adelaide to really build a narrative about them. The Wanderers, there's glimpses there, but on paper they look really promising, but football's not played on paper.
No, it's not. And, their front four is very exciting. Nicholas Milanovic, Juan Mata in there as well. Brandon Borello looks like he's really getting back into gear as well after an injury-plagued season last time around. So their front four is very good. Their defence is lacking. They've brought in Jong Tae-wook, who does not look to be at the standard at all just yet. And as you say, Adelaide one game in, it's hard to get a clear picture. So I still have Western Sydney edging it. I think, they played the derby against a very good Sydney team and barely lost. And then they've, got a point against Western away. So I think there's just so high expectations around the Wanderers. People expect them to be doing more, but I'd give them the edge here.
I think this one's an interesting one. I think we'll know a little bit more about both sides come 90 minutes on this one. It'll start to give us a shape of their seasons and where they're at early days. The last one, I saw this game as a Monday night fixture, Western United versus Melbourne City, with Western United as the home side, and I thought, oh my goodness, even the players' partners aren't going to be at this game. But they've moved it to Amy Park. You just talked about how good it is to see Western United at Ironbark Fields, and all of a sudden they're playing on a Monday night at Amy Park.
It is. It's worth noting that's not their choice. The Western desperately wanted this game to be out at Sunday. There are security concerns around playing other Melbourne-based teams out there. So it's been moved somewhat out of their control, which is unfortunate. So it's going to be essentially like a city game. You had a little pot shot at their supporter base as well. Maybe there's not a huge crowd in there in entirety, but yeah, two teams we're still not really sure about. Western United have got 2 draws. They haven't lost yet, to be fair to them. And Melbourne City still a bit of a bundle of question marks, really. So, yeah, that one will be a good learning opportunity.
Might be the Stephen Bradbury style 3 points on offer. Whoever doesn't fall over, we'll wait and see. But look, it'll certainly tell us about how committed fans are. We'll see a few Monday night games because of scheduling around a few different things later this season. Macarthur have made a good fist of Monday nights previously, and I know they've got a couple coming up. So hopefully some people can get out. The weather's starting to warm, so where else would you rather be but Amy Park on a Monday night, even if it is as a neutral? The neutrals might outweigh the home and the away fans. We'll wait and see. Before we wrap up round ball action, Lachie, we do know that the A-League Women's is on this weekend, so we might take a little bit of a break and dig back into the A-League Women's in a sec. Well, to close out the round ball segment of the show, let's dig into the A-League Women's competition. It kicks off this weekend, Lachie, and there's some really interesting clashes. We'll know a lot more about this. A lot of the, the pre-season games have been behind closed doors, which has made it a little challenging, but there's certainly some talking points from this, and the biggest headline that's been floating around is NRLW player Sheridan Gallagher, former young Matilda Sheridan Gallagher, returns to the Newcastle Jets in her NRLW off-season, still contracted to the Newcastle Knights, but will play for the Newcastle Jets. And it's a bonus from 2 points. 1, it means that we're going to get some more eyes on the game. 2, we get a young Matilda back who possibly solves the absence of Serena Bolden. Yeah,
look, possibly. And as you say, it's really tricky to know with the A-League's women competition. We don't really get much of a look into their teams until the season is right on our door. So it's really hard to know how any of these teams are going to go. It is a very interesting story, as you say. These cross-code athletes are still relatively common in the women's game. We saw one make a particularly big impact last year in Casey Dumont, released by Melbourne Victory. She didn't seem too happy about that. Goes over, plays for the Central Coast Mariners, and then eliminates Victory in a penalty shootout in the final series. That was a fun storyline. Maybe we'll get the same here. I don't know. Maybe there's a cross-code game with the Knights and she can score the winning goal or something like that. But it's an interesting element of the women's game. I'm sure the Jets will be will love to have her. And hopefully, with the absence of Serena Bolden, as you say, getting her move overseas, that's a pretty big hole to fill.
It certainly is a massive hole to fill. She was a headline act in more ways than one last year, the Philippine International, so we'll watch and see. Speaking of recruitment, we're not going to go chapter and verse through it, but the things to note, Perth and Canberra, very active in terms of A-League women's talent from other clubs going to them. And then the top teams, Melbourne Victory and Melbourne City, have been very targeted with a couple of key recruits, but Sydney probably most notably, and it adds a nice little mouthwatering element to this Sydney versus Central Coast game, they've taken the big name of Kaya Simon back to Sydney. It's kind of scary. All three of those teams, Melbourne Victory, Melbourne City, Sydney, they've been the powerhouses the last few years. Sydney going in and chasing a three-peat, Kaya Simon coming into that squad.
I think, honestly, you're probably a little bit generous to tag Victory onto that mix because I know Paletti probably has them in there as well, who we love to talk dub football with. But, in terms of silverware over the last few years, it really has been City and the Sky Blues, right? And so it's going to be really interesting. They do have this allure in the A-League Women's. A lot of the good players, know them as destination clubs. So they tend to get first pick a lot of the time when it comes to their players. But another interesting bit of contract news is Sydney FC's coach, Ante Juric. When the Matildas job came up for grabs when Tony Gustafsson left a few months ago, we were thinking, is he perhaps one of the candidates? Turns out, no, he's not, because he's agreed to sign on as head coach of the Sydney United 58 men's NPL team for next season. So that's going to have a lot of clashes in terms of his responsibilities for that side, and then for his Sydney FC side, especially coming towards the back end of the A-League women's season. So that is a spanner in the work for Sydney FC. They're going for a three-peat, I think, in championships, right? So that's going to make it more difficult for them.
They certainly are. One thing they won't lack is attacking prowess. I think they firmly sit with the target on their back. When you look at the squad they had, and then they bring in the likes of Millie Farrow and Kaya Simon as a couple, even Faye Bryson as well. That's adding some real solid core to that squad, and they just keep seeming to get better. So I think the Sky Blues are very much in the target of a lot of other sides, but we're going to see a big round ahead, as you can see on the screen there. We're looking forward to it getting underway, and I think we might even have to drag Paletti in over the next couple of weeks to start picking it apart a little, and looking forward to getting them capped on this show and joining a list of ongoing experts who can fill the gaps between my very bare knowledge. But Lachie, it's been a pleasure having you on again, mate. We look forward to talking lots of sport again with you next week.
Cheers, Chris. Always a pleasure.
We've kicked about the round ball enough. It is time to let some rubber hit the road and dig into the Formula One. And as we have done in each of our episodes so far, the man to pick apart Formula One is our producer extraordinaire, the motorsport maestro, the Formula One aficionado, JR Carter. Welcome back, mate. We've released you from behind the buttons.
Look, thank you. Good to be back again and good to be released from the buttons. So I think there's going to be a little bit of button pushing during the segment. Quite a bit of happening in the Mexico Grand Prix.
There certainly is a lot happening in the Mexico Grand Prix. It was a short turnaround coming across from Austin, not too far for them to go. But the one thing that stayed consistent was Ferrari performing well. This time it was Carlos Sainz taking the checkered flag.
And there was an exciting start to the race with Carlos Sainz leading from pole, but the two place positions changing very early with Charles Leclerc coming up and taking out both Lando and Max in pretty short fashion. There was a little bit more of a battle later in the race for Charles to sort of maintain those spots, but that was also a non-event once the pit stop started, as there was a couple of other little goings on that we'll get to shortly.
Yeah, there was certainly, as you said, there's a lot to take away from this race. We touched on the home track hopes for Sergio Perez. That's probably the less said the better. We might not get into Checo too much at this point. There's lots happening there. But the one thing that is the headline act, and it's the headline act whenever we talk F1 at the moment, while Ferrari are closing in the Constructors, the Drivers' Championship is the talking point, and Max and Lando not only battling for the Drivers' Championship, but battling for position on the track tooth and nail and almost coming to blows, if you will.
They certainly were. It was another repeat of them just battling it out, this time with some major penalties. We'll take a look at some footage here of what was actually going on between them in the early stages of the race.
Max will be fed that information straight away, because that means Lando's got to take it much more carefully now.
He dives down the inside. It's a late move for Lando Norris. Knocks up the good measure. Can he keep it on the track? No, he can't. They have to give the position back.
So that video there just shows, once again, a lot of elbows out, a lot of argy-bargy going on between Max and Lando. The result of that was 2 10-second penalties for Max. Lando getting away with it pretty free. There was some talk in the media this week about should have Lando been penalised as well. Right up to I seen an interview of Oscar Piastri this morning of Oscar saying, look, maybe they both should get penalised. Max was a lot more gracious in taking said penalty than I was expecting to, where he's like, 10 seconds, that's impressive.
Yes, it's very interesting. We've seen all the sides of Max so far this season, and we're talking about a little bit off air. I think he's getting to the point now of we're seeing flashes of the OG Max, if you will. A lot of confidence in terms of how he's going about this. No backward steps taken.
We generally are seeing a return of OG Max. Like, this is the Max Verstappen of like the 2016-17 seasons, of when Max was just an absolute terror to be driving next to, and even maybe a bit of the return of the Max who, if he was sitting in second place during a safety car, would just be creeping up next to the person before they changed that rule around him.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? I mean, I don't mind it from a viewing point of view in terms of Max, getting involved, getting around it and creating certainly something for us to talk about, but it's not something that's going to go away, I don't think. I think these two will be at each other tooth and nail across the next few weeks. And in terms of it, the on-track circus moves down to Brazil next, and we don't have to wait long for what will undoubtedly be another rematch between these two lunatics going head-to-head.
Absolutely. And twice the chances this weekend, as it's another sprint race. So we'll have the sprint on the early hours of Sunday morning, I should say, and then a full race early hours of Monday.
Well, it's certainly livening up. I think the gap in the standings now down to under 50 points. So we will watch with bated breath how things continue to shape out over this weekend and the coming pieces. But that's on the track. There's, as is always the way with the Formula One circus that rolls on, there is always something off the track. And the latest is rumours of Oscar Piastri heading to Red Bull. Now, this is peculiar. His manager / former F1 driver, Australian out there adventurer, and everything else that Mark Webber has been over his career, has come out and tried to silence the critics, and I can understand why.
Look, you've got to ask questions. Like we spoke last week about how Oscar's got the right people around him. Mark Webber is the right person to be around him, but let's have a think about just how Mark Webber might respond to, say, some Red Bull 1-2 sort of drama. Oscar has no chance going to Red Bull while Mark is his manager. We see the shot of that very famous interview when team orders caused Mark to fall back in the standings. But again, I don't know where this is coming from. Oscar is quite comfortable at McLaren. I think McLaren are likely to do the right thing by him. They haven't done the wrong thing by him yet, so he's got no reason to sort of move away from there yet. And that's a winning car right now. Other than the fact that Ferrari has sort of found a bit of form coming into this late part of the season. And just to add a touch to that Drivers' Champion part, Red Bull slipped down to third in the Constructors' Championship this weekend, with McLaren still pulling ahead in the Constructors again. So Oscar has no reason to move away at this stage.
Well, that's the piece, right? Even remove it from inside knowledge and information around the sport, but surely you look at it and go, he's nipping at Lando's heels there. If Lando eventually does decide to move, well, he would be an immediate choice for number one driver. The only reason for him to leave, why would you go to another team that's either on par or, as you're saying, slightly behind at the moment to also be a number two driver? The only reason I could see is for him to go to a better side that's, giving him a chance of winning as the number one driver, or alternatively to a team that he might think might improve to catch those top three sides, which I don't see anyone really leaping out at the moment to be their number one driver and shake things up. He's not going anywhere to be a number two driver. It would be absolutely madness.
No, that's right. And do you think about the seats that are available next year? Obviously that Red Bull seat is in high contention right now. Checo Perez did not do a lot with this weekend. He ended up, I think, finishing 16th out of a possible 17 finishes. So not the greatest place in the world to be at Red Bull right now. And there's all this drama. Liam Lawson improved again, but got into a bit of a battle with Perez, which probably isn't doing anything internally very well. And Yuki out in the first lap. So Red Bull's driver stock is not in a great place right now.
It certainly isn't. But as we said, the circus will continue both on and off the track. The merry-go-round of names being allocated to seats informally before they become formal will happen as the calendar continues to spin out. As we said, it heads to Brazil this weekend. We'll look forward to talking a little bit more of the F1 again next week. But we're going to take a little momentary break before we come back with a little bit of WBBL and closing out the show. It's been a plethora of sports to dig into. A big thanks to JR Carter. A big thanks to Lachie Avil for jumping on again. We've been loving getting into all the sport, from soccer to cricket to the Commonwealth Games and a little bit of F1 as well. But until next week, we love having you on board. Make sure you get around the show. Let us know what you want to see, what you want us pulling apart, and what guests you'd like to see moving forward on the Chris Macpherson Show. And enjoy your sport this weekend.